Hi, Jimmy.
Hello.
Hi.
I wasn't sure if I was supposed to join this Zoom meeting or there was another like Google Meet in.
Oh, the Zoom meeting is the right one.
Okay.
Let me share let me stop my video. Hi, Jimmy.
Hello. How you doing?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, my green screen is like hanging out in the back somewhere. So.
Is this your first time joining the Ratify community meeting?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, great. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm a developer advocate on the AWS Kubernetes team. So, and I've been asked to take a look at Ratify and other tools as well. So.
Oh, great. We had Samir and Jesse join us last week. Do you work with them?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I mean, I just started working on this, so I mean, I've known Jesse for a while, and I met Samir just today, actually. So
great. We hope to have Eric join us today to give like a brief workflow of Ratify. Jesse and Samir expressed that they were interested to getting like an introduction of how Ratify works under the hood.
yeah. I mean, I've been through some of the demos of it. Like I've been through there was a Medium article that was written, and I went through that using notation and ORAS and Ratify and using a Gatekeeper policy. So I'm very interested. I got some questions there as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, some of the people on the team have some conflicts today, so they may be late joining the meeting. But we have Teja from the community, but she's one of the author of the earlier pieces.
Okay, cool.
I'm sure if you have any questions, she will be able to answer them.
All right, thank you.
I liked your background, Jimmy. Did you put the screen? It's so cool. The screen of the curtain, right?
It's actually a green screen.
Oh,
I pushed it way back, so it's kind of like not where it's supposed to be. But
yeah, it's so realistic.
Teja, a few people have conflicts today.
Yeah, sure. But I have a hard stop at 4:30. So yeah, I'll sign up at 4:30. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, we had earlier a meeting we've been talking about it a few times, the Gatekeeper issue. I'm not sure if Eric will be able to join to provide an update. Let me ping him.
And who's Eric?
Eric, he's a dev on the Ratify project.
Okay.
Maybe it's good to have a round of introductions, given this is a community meeting, like to which company do we work and what's our relationship with Ratify?
Yeah, sure. Teja, do you want to go first?
Yeah, do you want to wait till Eric joins so that we can have
a round of introduction? Let me ping him. His status is read in a call, so I'm just gonna send him a message.
So Jimmy, what does like an developer advocate means? What are the typical response? I'm just curious because I have heard engineer, PM kind of thing, but this role is very interesting.
So it's a developer relations type of role. So instead of, I migrated over from being a specialist solutions architect for containers. So which was tied primarily to business and accounts. This is more between the actual product and service teams and developers in the community. So there's some community outreach and more focused on technical aspects of a service.
Got it. So it's more on the upstream and open source efforts, bringing it to the internally to the company and developers. Got it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was unmuted. He is joining right now.
Cool.
Hello.
Hi, Eric.
Hey, sorry I'm late.
No problem. We have a call, so he's first time joining the project, so we thought we'll do another round of introduction.
Oh, nice. Oh, so you want me to go?
I can go. Hello,
Okay.
Jamie. I'm Susan. I work for Microsoft, and I'm the project maintainer for Ratify, but I'm also new to this, so I'm just learning lots. Eric, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, my name's Eric. I'm an engineer at Microsoft as well, and I have been working on the Ratify project a little while. Yeah, I guess if you have any questions about, I think I've spent the most time on verifiers and executor. So if you have any questions about internals, let me know.
I can go next. My name is Teja. I used to work for Microsoft, but recently I moved to Providence and I'm working as a solutions architect in Providence.
Okay, then I'll go. My name is Jimmy Ray. This is my first time on this call. I work for AWS as a Kubernetes developer advocate. So primarily the EKS service and then upstream Kubernetes and all the assorted ecosystem tooling that's out there. My background is primarily compliance and governance. So I spent about 3.5 years or so using OPA and then Gatekeeper and also other tools like Kubernetes. So very interested in understanding how this use case fits all together. I've gone through one of the Medium posts that talked about how to set up an ORIS registry with using notation as well behind there. And so I've done all of that and verified signatures using Ratify, I think being called by an external data function using OPA Gatekeeper. But I just had some questions. So at some point when you guys open up the floor for questions, I'd like to fire off a few.
Hi, Sajay. We're doing a round of introduction and you just joined. Would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Sajay Anthony. I'm the engineering manager for the Azure Container Registry, but and also kind of like helping out the Ratify project land a home for the open source community with help from Laki and others from CNCF, OCI, and different communities as such. Nice to see new faces, and I'm glad things are moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you all. There was some interest in going through the Ratify Workfloor last week for the folks that's new to the project. Eric, we talked about giving like a little talk about the workflow. Are you ready for that today?
Yeah, I can talk through it. I was hoping to have one of our diagrams handy so I could share it. So I don't have that right now, but if I can talk through the flow of what actually happens when you make an admission controller request or from the CLI. So Ratify is split up into a couple different components. So there's the main meat of stuff happens in the executor. And the executor is complemented by the refer stores that you set up and the verifiers that you configure. So the refer store is just somewhere where you get stuff. Like you can get container image artifacts using a refer store. It could be a number of different things. The one that we use most is the ORAS refer store to get artifacts from the registry. You can implement a refer store that uses a SQL database, for example. It's just somewhere where you can get things associated with an image. And then the verifiers are different tools that you'd like to use to verify something about an image. For example, we have the notary verifier that verifies signatures over the image. And then we have a license checker verifier that looks at an SBOM and validates that the licenses used in the packages within the container are licenses that are allowed by your organization. So the main flow is you start by configuring Ratify. So you configure all of the refer stores that you'd like to use. You configure all the verifiers you'd like to use, and each one has its own parameters. And then we just sit and we wait for requests. And so on the CLI, you make that request immediately. Ratify starts up, gets everything set up, and then immediately starts flowing. And in a Kubernetes scenario, Ratify is just going to sit there and wait for requests to come from whatever admission controller you use. So when a request comes in, the first thing that we do is we loop through all of the stores that we have, and we check to see if any of those stores have artifacts associated with that container image. And then for each of the artifacts that we get back, we loop through all of our verifiers to check if they are relevant for that artifact. And if they are, we ask that verifier to perform its validation on it. And then we bundle up all the results and we return it back to the caller. So on the CLI, you just receive that back. And from an admission controller perspective, the admission controller receives that back. So for the initial use case that we have with using Ratify with Gatekeeper, all of that data gets piped back to Gatekeeper, and then we have a Gatekeeper policy that handles all of the results. And the policy today is pretty simple. It just looks at the overall success of that validation, but you could have that be more complicated if you'd like. And all of that logic that just loops through everything, figures out what applies to what is all happening in the executor. So I sort of think of those three things as the components. The three areas where you might want to focus are, refer store for place to get something, verifier for doing something with what you've gotten, and then the executor is just the glue that handles it all. So that's the I think that's the 10,000-foot view that I have for what Ratify is and what it is. And if I messed anything up, feel free to clarify or add something of interest. Teja, you might have something that I missed or that could be explained better. I don't know.
Oh, that was a very good overview, Eric. Jimmy had some questions. I would just want Jimmy to just get them.
Yeah, so I've got very little experience with it, but the demo setup that you have on the main project page, I set it up to use the ORAS registry, and then used Gatekeeper to, I guess, make a call out to Ratify. My assumption is there that when I did that, it was just bringing back that an image exists, or excuse me, a signature existed, right, on a particular image, based on the OPA code or the Gatekeeper code that I looked at, the actual policy. So when you said you could do more with, the calls to the verifier, my assumption is, or my question should be, not an assumption, my question should be, can you not only pull back a signature, but also can you verify that signature with an existing cert, or is that something on the roadmap?
Yes. So you mean for a particular certificate? So the example that we have today actually does that, but by default it uses the certificate that we just have a certificate that the getting started images are signed by, and if you deploy Ratify just as is, if you look in the Helm chart, the public portion of that cert is there. So if you just deploy the getting started, you're using that, but it is configured today that if you brought your own cert, for example, you could sign an image and configure Ratify to have that public certificate used instead, or in addition to.
So how would you configure it to use, so for instance, let's say I go into notation and I set up a set of certs that I want to use. And then, via notation, I go in and I actually sign the images in the ORAS type registry. And again, all this is kind of new to me, so I apologize if I'm using the wrong terms. But then once the images are signed with the certs that I've set up in notation, how do I get those certs into Kubernetes so that I could compare them with the signatures that I'm getting back from the call to the verifier? Is that not the right way, or where would I have to put these certs in order for them to be consumed for verification?
So today, that certificate, I'll have to check our Helm chart again. You definitely could take the public certificate and add it into the values.yaml of the Helm chart, and that should get it included. I don't remember if it can be file based, so like you just have a path, but it's
so the test cert is where the one you currently talked about earlier. That's the one I see in the values file.
Right. So if you replace that with the certificate that you're using to sign, Ratify would be using that instead.
Okay, and does it only support one certificate, or could I have multiple certificates, or?
Yeah, that's in the actual configuration of Ratify, that is an array. So you could have more than one certificate. And there are some kind of paper cuts right now where I'd have to look again, but the Helm chart might be right now set up to just use one, whereas Ratify itself could use any number that you add in the configuration in that array of the notary verifier config. But because that's an absolute path in the configuration today, I'd have to check our Helm chart to see if we actually separately deployed those certificates properly. So yeah, so Ratify, yes. Our Helm chart, I'd have to look.
Okay. Okay, so
Jimmy,
Sure.
along
Go
that
ahead.
the same question, I want to get more details on that. So are you thinking along, I have a certificate in some keyword or something. How can I point Ratify to verify my image against that cert, which is in keyword? Is that what you are going after?
So, I mean, at the same time that I'm looking at Ratify and notation and auras, I'm also looking at SigStore and Cosign, and there's some work being done by Nirmata and their Caverno tooling. And so my thoughts were, this entire process is kind of it's like an auth Z exercise. We're authorizing the execution of a container. And so I'm looking at it from a perspective of what's the best model. So if I have a trust store somewhere with my certs, my thought was that, those certs are public anyways in that trust store. So I would want a way to push them out using a hub spoke model, so that the certs I want to use for verification would be pushed out to my satellite or spoke clusters, so that the policy enforcement decision is made, close to the cert is right there by the policy enforcement point. So in this case, the open Gatekeeper service running in the individual cluster, as opposed to having to make external data calls back to get a cert to verify a signature that I already made an external data call to get as well. So we're talking about multiple external data calls. So I'm looking at a way, I'm trying to understand architecturally going forward, are you considering where you're going to store these and how they're going to propagate to, families of clusters? I mean, when I say these, I mean the certs themselves. So, and then on top of that, is there a way to, I guess, verify that the cert itself has not been, revoked somehow? Or maybe that's more of a notation question than a ratify question. But sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, but I'm just brand new to this.
So Jay, you want to, I know you have raised your hand. Do you want to take that question from a notation point, like the certificate management?
Exactly. So there are two things that I think being asked here. One is from an architecture standpoint, we kind of recognize that cloud providers will be mounting their secrets in some way or certificates in some way. So the generic recommendation would be to attach your key management service cert, public key or something, using a CSI driver into Kubernetes, especially for Ratify. There is a sample that is showing how it can be done on Azure, because I think the folks here are familiar with AKS. It would be great to kind of like have a similar model for KMS or any other service that can give the cert. So we don't want like have arbitrary mount points, because then discovering the certificate would be hard. From a notation standpoint, I think the discussion that's happening is that given an ability to discover these certs mounted in some way using a CSI driver or something like that, the validation will have to go through a notation policy definition that's just been checked in, which defines for this specific image, this is the key or this is the plugin or whatnot that needs to be used. Milind from the notation working group from AWS has also spoken about an outbound call that might need to happen as a part of revocation checks. So the revocation checking part is kind of open at this point. So the idea is that the notation libraries will have extensibility that can decide to go to an outbound service and make a revocation call, because it might not be a standard revocation check. It could be a revocation check with a digest saying that, hey, this digest is in a deny list and don't let the deployment go through, or don't let the pod get created and things like that. So there will be custom hooks that will enable both certificate validation plus revocation in the notation libraries going forward. These would not be within the Ratify configuration itself, because they might be implementation specific or cloud provider specific. But I don't know whether I touched on both the questions here in some way.
Yeah, I think I've already talked to someone inside AWS, Samir, about the revocation call being a separate call, and we can work. I guess we can work through that later. The part that I was very interested in, and I think you touched on, I just want to make sure I'm clear about it, and that is the idea of storing these certs locally in a cluster. You're currently leaving the implementation of that storage up to the cluster owners / operators. So
Right.
they may use your key management service or secret managing service and using the CSI secret provider. So that all makes sense. That kind of, I think that's direction that I was hoping it was going to go. I mean, there's a system of record for these things, but I could push them out in a spoke fashion to my individual clusters and figure out how I want to manage it that way, whether it be using CSI driver or whether using a GitOps approach or something, but kind of modeling it after the whole auth-c local policy enforcement that Netflix did with OPA several years ago. So yeah, I think I understand that part to a certain degree now. And so maybe I'll do some actual work with the AWS KMS and that type of work. But once I have those certs stored in the cluster, then, or available to me in the cluster, then I would be able to make a call to the verifier and supply both an image an image hash as well as the cert that I want to use to verify the signature. Is that a doable thing, or is that the way it's supposed to work?
Right now you specify a mount point. So the CSI driver mount certs in a location. Mm-hmm. And when the image is requested to deploy, there will be a resolution for this tag of the image is equal to this digest. Mm-hmm. Ratify will go resolve, okay, this is the digest. I need the signature for this digest, and use the cert that is at a specific mount point to check to verify if the signature is good. What we want to do in like vNext is, or like once the notation trust policy has been defined, is you can have multiple certs bound to different images. So for example, let's say you're pulling Nginx from Docker or Nginx from GCR or whichever. You can say, from there, I want to use this key or this cert, and from ACR or from ECR, I want to use this cert because these are my attested images, or I want to have everything use only this key. So those kind of knobs are what we want to add. But at this point, it would be a set of certs that if anything matches, it kind of goes through, otherwise it blocks. That's the start point of this whole validation.
So then it would, this Ratify call would actually itself reach back out to the mount point and find the one I'm looking for and then use it to verify?
Folks who have implemented the CSI part can, Teja or Eric, you folks can actually mention this.
Yeah, so for the CSI driver, that is retrieved at instantiation time of the Ratify pod. So as far as Ratify is concerned, it's just on disk.
So would I have to cycle Ratify then if I wanted to make changes to that, or?
Currently the stuff is picked up, all the certificates are picked up from the configuration. So we would need to change Ratify's configuration. That's another thing that we need to address. Yeah.
Okay. Dynamic configuration is an item on our board.
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to push.
No,
you
these are all good
than,
points. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just so brand new. I don't know what's there and what's not and which direction. More importantly, I just want to know what direction you guys are headed so I can help where I can.
Yeah, we've talked about, one of the things we've talked about is, stuff like CRDs or other mechanisms where Ratify could watch for configurations that would just be like, Kubernetes native stuff that you would push that would say, okay, well, now I use these certificates, and then we could have Ratify go and fetch those and have those available so that when the calls come in from admission controller, you already have all the artifacts that you need. So we do have stuff that we've thought about for how to make this, more elegant.
Would those things have to be necessarily like mutually exclusive? For instance, sometimes I run into customers who are very operator sensitive. So when they see that, you configure these CRDs, they're like, oh, you put another operator in my cluster? Is it written correctly so that it's not overwatching and dragging down my cluster? So my thought would be, well, the operator probably is going to work faster and more dynamic, but if you wanted to load them up with the config of the Ratify, by all means, that type of thing, but just throwing it out there. But yeah, I like the idea and being able to dynamically change it, as things change in the cluster.
Yeah, I would say the goal, it would be to support all of those use cases, like not just throw away the basic one where you have, it's on disk, here it is, here's the cert. When we get to the, now you can dynamically change it and, use whatever tools you're already using to make those changes in the cluster. So I think we keep both.
Okay.
Yeah, Eric, so we had a conversation with the Gatekeeper folks to kind of like decide the direction. And I think there is a set of items that they have recommended to kind of initially go do. And Eric is following up on figuring out what the direction we should take is. And that's not been finalized, which is why we have CRDs as an option, or we want to kind of like define how to dynamically inject. The other thing is there is a Gatekeeper timeout issue that we're trying to also understand, because critical. That is critical, that we need to solve that problem. And
yeah, because you either brick your cluster if they set it to fail closed,
right,
or you set it to fail open and it just doesn't, it times out and it goes right on by.
Correct.
So maybe auditing would pick that up. Another audit policy would pick that up, though, right? So
exactly. So this was a conversation that I think the team had with Sartak and Rita from the Gatekeeper side, just to kind of make sure that we're doing the right thing here. And we'll get some consensus from them and put that on, use that as a way to kind of define the architecture for this thing going forward.
Cool. Well, I don't want to monopolize the time. I appreciate all the information.
We're happy. I mean, I think the questions make it more real. And if we get feedback as to, okay, these are the paper cuts, or these are all the problems that somebody's facing, it just makes us be able to prioritize this work, because there are so many different priorities that's coming. Also, we've done kind of like using cosine as an option. So it doesn't mean that it's all tightly bound to notation. We wanted to kind of make sure that, because your SBOM verification is going to be very different from the signature verification, but you can still use it to kind of plug in these things and get this nested verification step in this. That was the motivation of kind of like getting the feedback. So thank you for kind of raising these questions.
Yeah, the SBOMs and scans and things like that are really starting to heat up, I guess. But yeah, so my biggest concern, I guess, is minimizing the number of external calls we need to make. So it's really promising to hear that we're looking at a way of storing these things resident on the cluster itself. Now, if people want to work out how they keep those updated on the cluster, that's one thing, and then keeping them updated and in Ratify is two separate things. As far as I'm concerned, they need to remain separate, because it's kind of like controllers and Kubernetes in general. There's one use case here and a different use case here. So, but yeah, cool.
Susan, did you have any agenda items on the hack doc? Okay, I think Akash's PR is the one thing that we want to merge, right?
Yeah, I think if Jimmy is complete with the question, we can move on to.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
Thanks for the questions, Jimmy. We can move on to the status of the pending items. Eric, since we just had the Gatekeeper discussion today, do you want to provide like an update?
Yeah, sure. So we had a talk with the Gatekeeper folks about that timeout, which is, there's what can we do about it? And the consensus is the timeout is strict because it starts to have a ripple effect into, fundamental Kubernetes timeouts that can cause problems for the cluster itself. And the ideal scenario is that we do not change those at all, because most people will just run with the default settings, and cloud providers don't necessarily allow customers to change those settings anyways. And so we need to figure out ways to work within the timeout that we have. And that is currently 3 seconds for Gatekeeper by default. So we started talking about ways that we could, within Ratify, preempt the request, the admission request. And the very short term, the thing that we could do the quickest to have sort of a fail closed environment is to check our Ratify's internal cache for image artifacts. And if we don't have anything cached, we would return a failure. And from our perspective, we could return that failure in a different way than just any other generic failures, so that at least that would be surfaced to somebody as the reason. And then within Ratify, we would continue on to cache the artifacts relevant to that image, so that a subsequent request we would be able to properly validate. So that would make sure that, you know, we're still blocking the things that we're supposed to while meeting the deadline there. And then the midterm solution that we talked about was adding a crawling mechanism to Ratify. So when it's deployed in a cluster, as part of the configuration, we could have users provide a list of registries that they are going to use images from. You know, some of the common scenarios we have are people have, you know, maybe one registry or some number of registries that most of their images come from. And we could crawl those registries to pull just artifacts. And that would make sure that, you know, the first time that anybody was going to go deploy a particular container image, we had already pulled artifacts for it, so that we could reduce the round trips we would have to make within that admission window. And then for the long-term solution, that's TBD. We don't know yet. We're going to have to continue to think on it. So we're going to keep in touch with the Gatekeeper team and make sure that, you know, whatever options we have, or find out from other people in the community how they're handling it, and make sure that we have a solution that's durable and more ergonomic. But that's the, you know, that's where we landed today on how are we going to address it.
Thank you, Eric. Any thoughts, Jimmy and Teja?
So, are there any retries in Gatekeeper? I'm not remembering.
When you say retries, you mean from the cluster to the admission webhook, or from the admission webhook to the external data? That's a good question. From the bug that the Gatekeeper people sent us to, I think the answer is no. If there's a failure, if there's a timeout at the cluster, when the cluster goes to talk to the admission webhook, if there is a timeout there, I don't think they retry. And
I've never seen a retry on that. Now you have the option of failing open or closed. That's a webhook configuration, but there's trade-offs with either one of those.
Yeah.
I think one recommendation which kind of leads to a bad user experience was instead of on deployment, we could go with pod create. So that would cause Kubernetes to actually retry pod creation, pretty much like image pull back off and things like that. Those kind of things kick in. So the first time the pod create might fail, but the second time if the option kind of like goes through and we manage to get the signatures and validate them, that we could kind of like serve directly from the cache. But the problem is people still have to go to Kubernetez logs and then see what's happening, and it's a tough experience. So we're still trying to figure out what the experience is. But it might give us a way while we kind of search for the long term, say that instead of going with deployment blocking or fail open, maybe we go with pod retry back off. And if the cache fails over time, then we mark the pod as a fail state or something like that. But we don't know exactly where to go. They're just a hot off the press brainstorming discussions we had with them at this point.
Yeah, the user experience for stopping a pod as opposed to stopping a deployment is difficult when you. I mean, the pod is a simpler thing to write, but the deployment is what most people are using. So, it takes a little bit of additional troubleshooting and figure out why the pods didn't start. I mean, you can see that in the status of the deployment, obviously, but the pod security standards have the same problem. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. For me, it was like kind of, I was thinking about specifically the way I've deployed stuff in the past with Helm chart. And, if your deployment, if you write a deployment and your Helm chart comes back and says, oh, I deployed successfully, but those pods never run, you miss that feedback, and if you put that into CI/CD, you'll think everything's fine, but it's not. And then, the alternative in the short term for us is, oh, we don't have anything cached, so we're just going to kick it back and say, try it, it didn't work, try again once we've cached all your stuff. And, if you are using Helm to deploy, that's going to cause your Helm deployment to fail, and you'll have to try again, which is kind of, the bad user experience there, but at least you get some feedback versus the silent, did it work or did it not?
That's our default current experience, right? We time out and it will again retry, and second time it will succeed.
What's
the current behavior and how is this different from?
Yeah, I have to look at our implementation. It's a good question. Currently, when we time out, do we send back an error or do we send back a 200 with some?
I think Gatekeeper protocol is an internal server error or something like that. And if Gatekeeper has that error, what does the Gatekeeper do? It will allow, or is it for the policy?
What was the question?
We are just figuring out what's our current behavior.
Yeah, so currently we have that code that was introduced that if we're not going to make it, we return a 500. And then the question is, what does Gatekeeper do with our 500? Is it any different than if we returned a 200 with it didn't work? And I think the answer is I don't know off the top of my head.
What should it be?
It should be, I mean, if you're fail close, then it should fail.
So
yes.
Regardless, so the thing is, if you're failed, so if you don't make a successful call for whatever reason, a 400 some series or a 500 error, then to me, that's the same as a failure to verify. And then it's a matter of what do you have the Gatekeeper webhook configured to do? If you have it configured to fail open, so then the thing goes on through, and then maybe you catch this with an audit policy later on. Instead of an enforced policy, you've got an additional audit policy that looks for these things that made it through. Otherwise, you have it set to failed close and hope you don't break your cluster when you see some transient networking issue that's causing your external data calls to fail.
Right. So that should be, so it's kind of up to Gatekeeper so I'd have to look at how we configure.
Yeah, I'm looking at the template. I think there are errors. We just say invalidated, we fail, which I think aligns with what Jimmy is saying.
I just tried it and posted the error in the chat. Yep. So it returns a 200, looks like.
Oh. And the deployment goes through?
think it depends on our rego.
Actually, sorry, yeah, this is not the right one.
I think we discussed
Signed invalid. Any error greater than 0 is invalid. And so it should be image verification failed, at least from the template. That's what
Yeah.
I see.
I mean, if your response errors are greater than 0, then that should
Yeah.
mark the whole thing invalid.
So then that means we are already doing the right thing, what we are thinking, right? What we want to be like, fail it if we cannot do it within the time. Or is it something that's the second option you talked about, right? Even though if we cannot, so two things, right? We verified and it is invalid, or we were not able to verify. Both of them will have the same end result. It will fail the deployment.
I just need to make sure that if we fail that we still follow through with the caching. I don't know if we still.
So who retries it then? Okay, we will fill up the cache.
Yeah.
Who is going to retry it?
In this scenario, it's the
end user.
It's the end user has to redeploy.
That's the experience. Yeah, that's the experience thing. It can be just seamlessly retry on behalf of the user without again I press helm something like that.
Yeah, so that's where we were talking about how do we make it so that the experience does not tell the end user to try again.
Well, I mean, one of the things you want to I mean, I know it's a bad user experience to try to tell them to do it again, but it's an even worse experience when you have a non-deterministic behavior. So
maybe in the CI/CD systems, would they be smart enough? Something with this kind of predictable error, will the CI/CD systems takes care of retrying it?
Yeah,
without the need for the end user.
That's what I'm saying. If in the very short term, this solution we come up with where we say, oh, we don't have that cached, you know, when we kick it back, if we kick it back in a way that it is easy for an end user to determine that that's why, at least in the very short term, people could try to work around that. You know, ideally in the longer term, that doesn't happen. We figure out how to handle that for them so that they get back one result, and that's, you know, it either worked or it didn't, and you know, we carried it along the way. But in the short term, since we can't do that, making it as easy as possible for people to understand the difference between, like, you know, server meltdown or you know, our cache wasn't populated.
Yeah, because what I'm saying for these kind of systems, it's very unusual that people do manual deployments. They definitely have some CD systems to do it. So if we can enhance or enrich those workflows or those kind of pipelines, whether it's GitHub Flow, GitHub Actions, or Azure DevOps pipelines, to make them smart enough to retry on this error, I think we can address at least 80% of the usage. Then 20%, yes, manual deployments they'll have this pain point.
I can add a section on the notes to brainstorm more about this timeout issue. So Jimmy, I'll post a link to our meeting notes. So anyone can edit the notes. So feel free to add your ideas and we can talk about more in the future as well.
I didn't know if we wanted to put them in the HackMD or somewhere else, but I put in our GitHub repo on the discussion tab, I made a discussion item there for this thing with the stuff that we had talked about. So if you just want to pop stuff in there, then we can use that as well.
Yep, that's great. Yeah, moving on to the next item. Akash have a authentication model interface to be ready to merge. Akash, are you blocked on anything?
So not blocked on anything. I think we're almost there. I made a few changes recently to address some of the comments that were left. Basically nothing major. One more comment I think that Teja just left was there's a dependency that's added on containerd that if we can remove, that would be good since it is a heavy dependency. So I think I can remove it because I was just stealing some of the methods from one of the libraries in containerd for reference parsing, but maybe I can just do that manually. So I'm gonna just push a commit to remove that and hopefully resolve that issue, and then we should be good to go to merge. So yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Akash.
And then on the other side of it, the actual provider implementation for workload identity for Azure, that is, I'm going to address your comment, Susan, especially changing the way I think the login authority or the scope that we use for getting the AAD token. So I'll change that. And then, yeah, right now I run into the timeout issue, like Eric was mentioning, the first time that I tried deploying, because of the round trips that it has to take to get the token, authenticate to registry, pass Auras the credentials, and then Auras does its own bit with grabbing the refers and all of the verification. It times out initially, but the second round, it works because we cache the registry client itself. So I guess initially, until we've kind of figured out the whole caching scenario that Eric was talking about, that would be the user experience. They would have to basically try again. So yeah.
So the workload identity PR is in draft mode. Is it meant to be merged, or do you want to keep it in draft?
I've kept it in draft because it requires that the framework PR be merged first. There's a dependency on it. So that's why I just kept it as draft until the other one was merged.
Yeah, sounds good. So Akash, is the idea to, like, first we'll merge the authentication model interfaces, and then maybe next week we will merge the other PR?
Yes, yeah, that would be the plan.
Cool. Teja, do you have any other questions with the authentication model?
You mean authentication model? I think
PR.
last meeting we agreed on, at least we can bring it up again, in terms of which provider to start with, which is the provider that would be more commonly used is secrets, Kubernetes secrets. I think we dropped our ball on credential provider as there were some limitations on reaching the kubelet and all those things.
Yeah.
So are we on the same page that we will invest on adding secret provider?
I created a pod for the secret provider.
Okay. And the Gatekeeper validation webhook 15 seconds, why is that in draft? Is it still pending or something?
I'm gonna abandon the PR. That was my first attempt to kind of override it because it worked in my cluster when I tried it. So I thought, I was talking to Eric, I was like, oh, maybe we figured it out, we solved the issue, but then we got feedback that, oh no, there are certain scenarios where it can cause inconsistency. So I'm just gonna delete that PR now.
Oh, I see. The 3 seconds was, you were not aware of that magic number 3 seconds?
Yeah, I thought, oh, it's just the default, maybe we can configure it there.
Yeah, but that number 3 seconds will be haunting our dreams, yeah, till we figure this out. Okay. Sounds good, yeah.
Yep, thanks. And the pending item from last week was the GitHub action. So Nathan did a demo of the Ratify GitHub action, and that PR is out for review. I've posted a link on the HackIR MD file. So feel free to review it this week.
You mean GitHub Actions PR is out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I can post a link to the.
I think it's to a separate repo.
Yeah, I think Nathan made a new repo in Days Labs.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, that's all the items we're tracking. Jimmy, do you have any questions about?
Yeah, just you said you got a hack MD link somewhere.
Yeah, It should be in the meeting
Is it?
invite, but let me post it again.
Let me look.
Did you accept the Zoom meeting as a calendar, like Google Calendar?
No, it was sent to me internally in AWS, so I don't
Got
see
it.
it.
So the meeting notes may not have been there. Let me post that.
No, I think it was just forwarded to me as well.
There's an agenda link on the repo README. That's the same doc, right? Susan?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, I just posted a link in the chat. And here is the link to the GitHub PR link for the GitHub Ratify action. Yeah, that's everything on our agenda, and we're at time. So we'll see everyone next week.
Thank you, Susan. Nice job. Yep.
Thank you, Teja. Have a good week.
See you, folks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Good to have you, Jimmy. Good to see you.